Tomorrow is the 5th Sunday of Lent, and for 2 weeks I will probably not have time to make a video for FilioQue. I'll start again after Easter, after having celebrated the resurrection of our Lord. But still, before that, I just want to start reflecting on the anger of the Russians. Follow the anger, you'll find reasons for anger, you'll find injustice, and through injustice you'll find justice, and you'll find the deepest and best, most beautiful aspirations of the human heart. So, before we're going to celebrate the mysteries of the suffering of Christ, His death and His resurrection, I just want to make a start with reflecting on this anger in the Russians. We've had a first look at the anger in the Ukrainians, people living in the Ukraine, but we must make the step, maybe a bit difficult, maybe daring in these times, but to look at the search of justice in the hearts of those people who are the Russian culture, who have a Russian past, who live in Russian countries. Now, first of all, we've seen how the presence of this Chekist power in the Ukraine, this communism, and its faceless esoteric power of the secret services, the special services, how it has sort of, it has woken up, it has kindled a certain love for Nazi symbolism, Nazi ideology, Nazi National Socialist mysticism even in the Ukraine. And that we can still see that today. But what we must not forget, that also by some Russians, the Germans were seen in a very special way, close to being liberators. Also within the Russian culture, there's an echo of this Nazi ideology, which makes it all the more ridiculous that the present president of Russia claims that Ukraine needs to be denazified, the denazification of the Ukraine. If you look closely at the war, for example, there has been a Russian who was very courageous in defending Leningrad against the Germans. He took part in the battle for Moscow, and then he was taken prisoner by the Germans. His name was General Vlasov. And from that moment he started fighting not against the Russians but against the communists with the Germans. And at some stage he changed camp again and started fighting for the Russians. In other words, this General Vlasov, who was a courageous soldier, he was squeezed in between this ideological conflict of two totalitarian systems that made war, but that both were evil. What to do if you're caught in between? It's very tragic, and it ended tragically. General Vlasov was captured by the Soviets, tortured, and finally he was killed, he was executed. But there are other stories where you see that this Nazi ideology, its sort of mysticism, was also taken over by Russians as a reaction against communism. Now, we may think very quickly that the Russians were very passive. No revolt. Soldiers were sent as cannon fodder to the front. Where is the Russian resistance? Where is the Russian reaction against communism? And I think to start seeing that, we must first correct a very big mistake. During the time of communism, we knew that there were dissidents in Russia, people that had another opinion than the main ideology. They went to prison, they were persecuted, sometimes they were killed. We call them dissidents. They resisted communism. But we forget that they resisted communism with their ideas, with their words, with their writings. But there were other ways of resisting the Soviet regime, and there many, many more people were involved. The dissidents were intellectuals, sometimes Christian intellectuals, and most of them found indeed very great consolation and strength in the Christian faith. But there were also many artists, poets, who found strength maybe not in churches and in the Bible, but in the bottle. It was kind of trendy to be an alcoholic, writing poems or making beautiful paintings in the Soviet Union. There was a whole underground of symbolic resistance against communism. But the strongest resistance against communism, it is what we used to call criminality, common criminals. And here we see the great confusion and therefore actually the great anarchy of Soviet society. If the state has stolen everything, if the state even has a monopoly over reason, then what do you do if you want to be free? If you want to have a certain degree of responsibility towards your friends, towards your family, then you start working for yourself. It's a kind of free enterprise, but without limits and with its own laws. Don't forget that somebody making chairs and selling them privately was already a dissident and a criminal at the same time in the Soviet Union. And this free enterprise, this endeavor to create from nothing, from less than nothing, a middle class, it had no limits, and that's what was the mafia, criminality. And criminality in Russia, banditism, as they call it, not Nazism, but banditism, it developed its own culture, it developed its own laws, but you cannot compare it immediately with criminality in the West. You cannot compare it with criminality in a society that is open, that is democratic, that has an exoteric power. And the strange thing is that this was a resistance, but without ideas, without ideology. In ideological terms, it was like a nihilist resistance. But of course it was very practical, because it was dealing with work, it was dealing with robbing banks. Well, in any case, what is the value of money if the state has stolen everything? So to rob a bank, you can hardly call it criminal if the state has imposed with a lot of violence and a lot of psychological manipulation such a idiotic system on people. So all the references were upside down. Everything was so completely in an altered state of human society that this criminality developed in completely its own ways. And for example, of course, many of these criminals ended up in prison, and if you wanted to prove that you were a free guy, a strong guy, a tough guy, you spent at least some years in prison. It was not seen as something bad at all. I would love to show you some of the tattoos that were very current in prison in Soviet times. The tattoos show an incredible hate and disdain of leaders like like Brezhnev, like Stalin, Dzerzhinsky. I'd love to show you some of these tattoos, but unfortunately, not only are they slightly distasteful and extremely violent, but they are also incredibly obscene. So I don't think in a video of Father Elias I should show you the strongest of these tattoos, but you can guess what they show, you can guess what they are about. And they show very well, very clearly, very explicitly, very graphically, that these people knew very well the demonic character of the communist system, and that they found their way of being angry at it, resisting it, fighting it, but in a very non-ideological way. Often they did respect religion and respected it very much, but still it was always something that was hidden for them, that was very mysterious, that they had to admire and love from a distance, because to come close it was just too dangerous. But you'll find very few real atheists in what was the Soviet Union. An atheist, somebody who openly said he did not believe in God, he was just an idiot who wanted to make career and climb up in the system. He was like a worthless human being who wanted to make money and career and become famous over the corpses of his own friends. Russia was not passive, not at all. I want to conclude with, and of course we'll come back to this, but I want to conclude with observations made by three people that are, to me, very authoritative and admirable persons. What they say about the Russians. First, Solzhenitsyn. Solzhenitsyn has written a very thick book. He has written many thick books, but there's one very big volume in two parts. It's called 200 Years Together, and it's about the Russians and the Jews living for 2 centuries in the same empire. It's an extremely detailed and extensive study of the relationship between the Russians and the Jews. And Solzhenitsyn, he explains how it's true, many of the Bolsheviks that made the revolution, especially intellectuals, were Jews. Jews played a very important role in the Bolshevik revolution. But that does not mean that many Jews were Bolsheviks, which is, unfortunately, what many Russians still think, that it was a Jewish revolution. A big plot, a big conspiracy of the Jews. Well, the thing is, the majority of the Jews had nothing to do with communism. But it's true that in the leadership of the Communist Party and its different organizations, the Jews played a very important role. And Solzhenitsyn wonders, and he really questions his own people. He is very self-critical of his own people. And it's very beautiful to see how this courageous man has searched the truth. He says, it was Russians who killed Russians. It's easy to point the finger at the Jews. But why? Why did Russians kill Russians? Even if they had an outside agent, secularized Jews, it was the Russians who killed Russians. And he even comes up and he has experience of the Gulag, the concentration camps in Siberia. And he says it's strange. When you were in those concentration camps and you were all together in the same thing, Jews helped other Jews. There was a certain solidarity when they were sent to these concentration camps. But he says Russians kept on persecuting Russians. There was no unity. They were in this system of hate, of self-hate, and they didn't seem to get out of it. That's what Solzhenitsyn says. Another person which I want to cite is a bishop who has now died, who lived in Lithuania, with whom I spoke about the time of the occupation. He was a priest in Lithuania, Catholic priest, very low profile. Later he was a bishop. He has been persecuted. And he also said, you know, Russians are very nice people. They are good people. Maybe not very well educated. They live far away in a very hostile landscape with a hostile climate, but they're good people. He says it's always foreign agents who have turned them into butchers, who had to lead them into catastrophe. That's also something that must make us think and make the Russians think about their own identity. Because it has been, over the last decades, a big problem for Russian thinkers, and actually since the French Revolution, to say, who are we? Are we from Asia? Are we European? What are we? There's really an amazing identity problem, which you find in Russian thinking, in Russian art, in even today. The third person, whom I respect a lot, who said the same thing, is a former spy, a Dutchman, whom I met a long time ago. He had spent something like 20 years in the Soviet Union as a spy. He had taken the identity of a Russian soldier who had died somewhere or who was missing. He had taken over the identity, had completely changed into this other person. He learned to speak Russian like a Russian, and he lived in Russia for 20 years. He told me that he really likes the Russians. He said they're nice people, they're good people. If you see how a guy in the army in Siberia lives on 3 potatoes a day in really incredible poverty, and he does it for his fatherland, and he keeps laughing. Or a city somewhere back in Siberia, the heating system is broken. It's not functioning. It's -40. People sit with their coats inside their houses and use some wood to heat themselves in their apartments. And they still laugh. They're still happy. They're still optimistic. He has described to me this kind of things that he has seen in Russia. But he said, you know, the problem with the Russians is that they are so credulous. They believe anything. Don't go and conquer Russia. They will defend their country. You cannot conquer it. But you can cheat them. They're very gullible. And he says that's what's tragic, and I feel I have also cheated them by being a spy. He feels sorry about that. So they're very credulous, they're very gullible. There is a lack of strength with respect to the truth, to concepts, to ideas. And so they're very vulnerable to that. We have to go further into this culture to understand a little bit better what is happening now and what, from the point of view of faith and Christianity, is now the best. How do we proclaim the good news to the peoples of the world? Amongst others, the Russians. What gospel, what aspect of the gospel do they need today? And I think history has brought us to a point where that is quite an urgent question.